Welcome to Kiffin's Keep, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project of the London Lyceum, which is all about serious thinking for a serious church. I'm Jordan Stefaniak, president of the London Lyceum and host of Kiffin's Keep, and as always, I'm excited to be here with you all today. In today's episode, I'm going to be covering a common topic that I discuss with some frequency and regularity, and that is the nature of natural theology and philosophy and sort of the necessity of technical precision and jargon when it comes to the theological enterprise. Before we get started, just a reminder to go ahead and like the video if you enjoy the content, and then to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything, and then don't forget to comment if you agree, disagree, or have additional thoughts on this perennial topic. So let's go ahead and jump right in. The reason I'm thinking about this is because I did an interview with my friend Chad Kim on his podcast. It's not out yet, so depending on when you're watching or listening to this, it may be available, it may not. But we're talking about my new book on classical theism, A Christian Introduction, which you can pre-order. Sorry, I've got a hard copy. I've had a hard copy for a long time, and yet it's not available for purchase yet. Well, you can purchase it on Amazon, and you're just not going to get it till January. That said, that's pretty close. The topic we were discussing was just the nature of philosophy, the nature of the sort of technical precision, like I mentioned, where this is a perennial question that comes up especially in American evangelical contexts. When you start getting to discussions of classical theism, what often comes up is this sort of, wow, that's abstract. Wow, there's a lot of really precise distinctions, and it seems just not super relevant to my daily walk in faith. These are not questions that I usually ask, and a lot of these are really complicated sort of questions in a sense that makes me think they're not relevant, or we should sort of jettison them. And you could blow that up to just the big picture of what do we do with philosophy in general, especially the analytic tradition and all of its extreme obscurity at points. How does that really fit into theology? And so I want to make three, points in this, and three separate arguments. They're not substantial arguments, but I think I can defend them somewhat. And that first one is, I want to say that philosophy is essential to theology, though it's not ultimate. So I don't think anyone wants to make philosophy ultimate, and everyone is making use of philosophy in some way or another. Some just are willing to say, hey, yes, I'm using philosophy, and I'm going to be transparent about it, and I'm not going to pretend that it's not actually happening. Everyone's doing some level of philosophical or natural sort of engagement in making and refining theological arguments. They're using the law of non-contradiction. They are using various structures and basic arguments, using premises and leading to conclusions. They're using philosophy, whether they like it or not, to make any sort of argument. So it is essential. Since it's essential, you should probably try to be good at it. You should probably try to give some effort toward being better at it than not good at it. Now, not everybody is going to be as good as others at philosophy, and there are some levels of philosophy that are better and more, not better, but they're easier for most everybody to grasp. Everybody's got an intuitive grasp of certain common sense philosophical aspects. Now, some of the more technical nature of how arguments are structured to make them valid and sound, that can be more complicated. But I think everybody should agree that philosophy is essential. It's the handmaiden to theology. It's not the ultimate sort of source of theological reflection, though it's a necessary element of all the entire theological enterprise. It's impossible to interact without rational deliberation. It doesn't matter who you are, how many times you say, the Bible and Bible alone. You can scream that as much as you want. You're going to be using philosophy whether you like it or not. It's just a matter of whether you're transparent about it and whether that philosophy you're using is good or not. So I think that's pretty straightforward and pretty clear. I think most people would agree with it if you got down to the nitty-gritty. There's just some semantic differences with how people are going about it, and I think there's a sort of sleight of hand for those who want to say, no, philosophy is bad. You got the classic text, Colossians 2:8, don't be taken captive to this vain sort of philosophy, but that's vain philosophy, not just philosophy in general. It's a very specific category of philosophy. It would be a logical fallacy to then assume that all philosophy is bad, right? The other thing I want to say is technical precision that sometimes comes with these sort of philosophical arguments is necessary for theology. Now, it's not necessary in the sense that everybody has to have this really exorbitant philosophical toolkit, in order to do any sort of theology. Everybody in your church, even Grandmother Joe, they can do theology and they can do some level of philosophy. they're not going to have the same level of precision that everyone has. And that's okay. That's not a big deal. It doesn't sort of dismantle your ability to know and enjoy God. Okay. But there is a level of reality that precision is necessary. There's a reason that we have confessions of faith. There's a reason that we have creeds. There's a reason that we have these different elements, because they protect us from making bad, foolish statements. So I think precision is necessary. And I think that high-powered philosophy is also necessary. It's not necessary for everyone. All right? So that's the third point, I guess I would say, is that some technical precision, like extreme technical precision, is necessary, and yet it's not for everyone, and that's okay. So I pose these sort of questions to my friends in our Slack community, and one of them came up with a really nice sort of illustration to sort of demarcate, I think, the relationship here, where you could say, let's take the medical profession, because I think everybody's comfortable in a lot of different professions that say there's complexity here, there is precision here that's required, and not everyone's going to be able to obtain to that, and that's okay. So let's take the medical sort of profession. You could say the lay level people in your church would be like a CNA or RN sort of role. Then you have pastors who are sort of like the family practice MDs. And then you have the theologians and philosophers, I guess, who are sort of the PhD researchers in the lab somewhere with their coats and their microscopes learning things, and they may not have talked to somebody in 30 years. I think that's an apt sort of parallel between what's actually happening in the medical field, what's happening in the theological field. It's okay and necessary to have theologians and philosophers who are very, very absorbed in very, very obscure things, because that's necessary for theology. It's necessary for all the different elements that actually happen. Now, is it necessary for everybody? No, that's okay. That's why I don't love sort of the concept of like, hey, everybody's a theologian. In one sense, yes. In a sense, everyone is a theologian. Everyone thinks about God. Everybody has thoughts about God. Everybody has drawing inferences and making conclusions about God. But in a professional, capital T theologian sense, where really engaged in the primary sources and thinking deeply for decades, not everybody's a theologian. And that's okay. You don't have to be. You don't have to be a capital T theologian. You don't have to be a capital E elder. There's nothing inherently wrong with not being one of those, fulfilling one of those vocations as a Christian. That's totally fine. We need people who do it. Not everyone's going to be qualified to do it. And that's totally, totally okay. So really, those are like the sort of three distinctions I would make. I think philosophy is necessary. I think technical precision beyond your average everyday person is necessary. And that might grate against a lot of people who grew up in sort of Bible, church context or fundamentalist context who want to say there's like this really extreme democratized approach to theology. I don't think that's a good way to think about the task of theology. There's a reason that we get to Ephesians, and it talks about how the Lord has given gifts to us in these different sort of roles, pastors and teachers and these other things. He could just say, well, everybody's the same. Everybody has the same capacities. No, they don't. They don't have the same capacities. They don't have the same giftings. And that's all right. That's not taking anything away from anybody else. They just have different vocations, different skills, different abilities. And that's totally all right. So one way I like to think and describe, like, why is it necessary to have some of these technical distinctions? Take divine simplicity, splitting all these different hairs about God doesn't have parts, he doesn't have complexity, and all these, and getting into some really fine-grained distinctions, pun intended, I guess. And you would say, hey, but Grandma Jo, again, she doesn't need to know all that stuff. She just needs to know that she can trust God and love him. There's a sense in which, yeah, that's true. You just need that. But these things can actually bring greater life and validity and, I don't know, strength and depth to your faith. So when I think of someone, and I think the sort of example that often comes up is, do you think, all these archaic, or not archaic, but abstract distinctions, do you really think no one talks about that way about their wife or somebody else, where they're thinking, well, my wife is this, and let's make these really fine-grained distinctions. You think God really cares about that? There's really actually value in that? And I say, yes, absolutely. Imagine a herald of a king coming and saying all these great, wonderful things about who the king is, and say, no, the king is like this. Here, let me explain. Let me show you all the ways the king is good because of these different aspects of his goodness. I'm going to tell you another thing about his goodness. I'm going to tell you another thing about his goodness. And all these things are founded upon these different little aspects of the king, because the king is so good. He's so great. Part of the reason he's great is because of these things. The king is going to be very pleased with all these fine-grained distinctions, even if there's debate and discussion amongst these people. where they're saying, wait, that doesn't make sense. I thought the king was like this and did this and did this. No, 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 the king is like this. Let me explain all these things. That's how great and good the king is. So in my understanding, I tend to think that God is very pleased with some of these abstract debates. Some of it can veer into speculation, sure, the vain speculation that the Bible warns against. But a lot of that is very, very different sort of speculation. You kind of know when you see it. It's not this really technical, metaphysical, or epistemological different discussions where we're trying to figure out how do we know stuff and what does it actually mean for this to be that. That's not the sort of vain discussion that they're talking about. They're talking about other things. They talk about genealogies and some other stuff. Kind of like the people who get really obsessed with weird numbers and different things. That's what I tend to think those are referring to, and not necessarily some of the more precise and pristine metaphysical debates that go on. So here's a really good quote that I think sort of is some nice icing on the cake, and it's going to come from my book here. It's not my quote. It's Francisco Suarez, who he says, although divine and supernatural theology depends on the divine light and on principles revealed by God, nevertheless, since it is perfected by human reasoning and rational discourse, it is also assisted by truths known by the light of nature, and it employs these as servants and instruments in order to perfect its reasonings and illuminate divine truths. So I really like this, where it's perfected by human reasoning and rational discourse, and it's also assisted by truths known by the light of nature, and it employs these as servants and instruments in order to perfect its reasonings and illuminate divine truths. So you can illuminate further divine truths through the natural order as you begin to understand and try to build these things up. So that's my take on this. That's my take on philosophy and the role it has in theological discourse. Obviously, you could write a whole book. You could do a lot of long monologues on these sort of things, but you guys let me know. Do you agree, disagree? Do you have additional thoughts? Did I miss something? Did I mischaracterize something? Do you think I should do further reflection on this? I'd be happy to. I think it's an important topic. It's a relevant topic, and it doesn't get enough clear articulation on some of these topics. So I encourage you, if that's of interest to you, I've got some sections in the book on it. I think it's valuable. At least I thought it was valuable. It helped me as I was thinking through it, and I realized that there's still a lot of misunderstanding on the topic. And it really cuts to the core of how we do arguments and how we think and do theology in general. So let me know what you guys think. I appreciate you guys tuning in to Kiffin's Keep, and I look forward to thinking with you guys soon.